And now to Canberra, where Parliament resumes for the last time this year. They have it better than school teachers, don't they? And with the mini-budget and mining tax scandals, latest polls are interesting. Here's Shadow Assistant Treasurer Senator Mathias Cormann from the great state of Western Australia. Welcome to the show again, Senator Cormann.
Good to be back, Janine.
And I must say, I promised you I would say that you were right about the mining tax.
I did tell you so, didn't I?
Well, I've said it. I promised you I'd say it. But you were also, can I say, wrong as well, because wasn't the Liberals' whole campaign saying, oh, this is terrible, taxing the poor miners, they can't afford it, you'll ruin the industry. I should have thought you'd be gloating that they're not paying any tax. Isn't that exactly what you wanted?
Well, I mean, how incompetent can a treasurer be when he comes up with a significant and complex new tax on an important sector in our economy, which is costly to administer for the government, costly to comply with for business, which doesn't raise a single dollar, when the government has already spent all of the money they thought it would raise and more. Look, I mean, obviously the original version of the resource super profits tax was supposed to raise $37 billion over the forward estimates, over our current forward estimates, and that was based on some much more conservative assumptions as part of Wayne Swan's efforts to cover up and mask the fiscal impact of the deal that he and Julia Gillard did with the big three miners. They significantly upgraded their commodity price and production volume assumptions to something that was never realistic. No wonder he was so desperate over the last 2.5 years to keep them secret, because he knew that if we were able to look at them, that we would be able to figure out officially then that the mining tax was never going to raise the revenue he said it would raise.
I agree with you totally that the second incarnation was a disaster. It was cobbled together.
Well, the first incarnation was bad.
Well, we disagree on the first, but let's face it, are you ever going to concede, though? You didn't like the first one because it was going to tax them too high. In some ways, isn't it hypocritical to attack the government when it shows that what they said all along was correct? If there's a collapse in commodity prices, then miners won't have to pay. Isn't that what a good tax should do? Not tax them when they're, you know, under pressure.
Well, there's 2 points to this. Firstly, you know, the government, of course, complained for a very long time about state and territory royalties, which supposedly were inefficient. But courtesy of the mining tax deal, where Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan promised to the big three miners to credit all state and territory royalties, they actually provided a direct incentive to state governments around Australia to increase those royalties, because, of course, you know, the federal government was going to refund them, which is why 5 out of 6 state governments so far have increased royalties on iron ore or coal, where in the past competitive federalism would have put downward pressure on those royalty rates.
Just on the royalty issue, though, is it true that the royalties were going to be refunded out of any tax revenue that was generated, and if there's no revenue, they will in fact not have to be refunded?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, what
in that case, are you going to stop your counterparts, the Liberals in Western Australia, your own state, from gouging miners? Because you said it was a really bad thing to hit miners, especially, I would have thought, at this time.
Well, I mean, what we've said is that the current taxation arrangements and the current resource taxation arrangements with royalties at a state level as a price to pay for the value of the resource, and a tax on profit, which is the company tax at a federal level, was an appropriate arrangement to ensure that people across Australia get a proper return from a non-renewable resource.
But the mining companies didn't want that. They wanted to get rid of the royalty system because they keep being gouged, as all these state governments are proving at the moment.
Yeah, but Janine, and this is the point. Like the Rudd government first and the Gillard government second, as much as they were complaining about how inefficient royalties supposedly were, they didn't get rid of them. Okay. I mean, the Henry tax review recommendation was, let's have a national profit-based tax to replace state and territory royalties.
Well, that's what they tried to do, you could argue.
Well, they didn't actually even try. They never even had a conversation with state and territory governments about it. All they did was negotiate the design of a tax exclusively and in secret, behind closed doors, with 3 big companies.
Okay, we're
and quite
going
frankly, they
backwards
were
again.
done over.
Let's,
well,
yeah,
that's
no,
true.
no, we know and I agree, and we've both agreed that this second version was bad. Now, look, I want to move on because this all came out under the mid-year budget, mini-budget we saw last week. Quite simply, Senator Cormann, if your government comes to power, you already, I mean, there was a lot of cutting you would have to do. Do you concede we are having a commodity price slowdown? We are seeing tax revenue slow. That's going to put pressure, and at least you don't have to worry about the lost revenue from a mining tax. But what exactly are you planning? I know you told me last time that you are in consultations all the time about your own budgets, but surely without having a go at the other side, just from your side's point of view, the slowdown in tax revenues does put pressure on anyone who's going to be in government, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it makes it particularly important for government to live within its means. And of course, if you want to look at areas across government where there's opportunity for savings, well, for example, I mean, we've been on the record for some time to say that we did not support the measures the government had attached to the mining tax because they weren't actually sustainably funded. And as you know, the mining tax package, which was revenue, even if it raised as much as the government thought it would raise, and related expenditure, actually was already leaving the budget worse off. So by getting rid of the mining tax and the related spending, you immediately put the budget into a better position.
I'm going to try and move off the mining tax again. How about Asian white paper? I'll throw that one at you. Without going into a long political discussion, just tell me a couple of the things that perhaps there's a whole lot I don't like about it. Is there anything in particular that offends you about it? Or is it bipartisan and we all have to jump on the bandwagon saying Asia's great, it's the only thing in the whole world?
Well, I mean, the coalition has welcomed the white paper, and of course we recognise that we have a very important and increasingly important relationship with Asia, and that needs further deepening. I mean, we are not convinced that, I mean, this government is always very good at raising expectations and making grand statements. They're not so good when it comes to the delivery. So, I mean, whereas from our point of view, we would say and we would argue that if you look at our track record in government, we have been able to demonstrate that we are able to keep very good and continue to develop very strong and good relations with our traditional allies and friends around the world, like the US, while also deepening and strengthening our relationships with key partners in the Asia-Pacific.
Do you agree that it's important? I mean, we shouldn't get too carried away. I mean, we have been hearing this for decades. I mean, there is still Europe, it might be in trouble, and the Americas has a very large economy. Do you think we sometimes get a bit carried away?
Carried away with what?
Asia.
Well, no, I mean, no, I don't believe so. I mean, if you look at where the global economy is heading, I mean, and this is a great opportunity that we have as a nation. I mean, we do live in the part of the world, in the Asia-Pacific, which will generate most of the global economic growth over the next few decades. So there's a lot of opportunity for us. There are still a lot of challenges for us too, and which is why it is so important to make sure that we get our policy settings right, which is why it is so important that we make sure that we are as internationally competitive as we can be, that our cost of business.
Final question, just quickly. Polls today not good for your side of politics. Just give us the line you're using today, or do you ever get concerned by the polls? Because the Libs tend to gloat when they're bad for Labor. What do you think when they're bad for Libs?
I think you'll find that I never gloat when they're good, and I never slash my wrists when they're not so good. As far as I'm concerned, we've got a very clear job ahead of us. We need to continue to hold a bad government to account, and we need to continue to present ourselves as a credible alternative government with a good plan for better government for Australia. That's what we'll continue to do, and in all of my interactions with people across Australia, that's what I'm focused on.
Do you think you need to be a bit more positive? Do you think, I mean, the general feeling is that maybe the voters are sick of the negativity of Tony Abbott?
Well, I mean, I think that Tony Abbott is a very positive person. I think that we have obviously got two roles, and one which is easily perceived as negative, but it's an important role nevertheless, and that is to scrutinise the activities of the current government. And when the current government does bad things, obviously, it's very hard to say positive things about it just to be positive. But on the alternative side, we are working very hard to develop a strong and positive alternative agenda for government, and you will see that come out more and more in the lead as we get closer to the next election.
I look forward to that. Lots of happy talk from you. Thank you, Senator Cormann. Look forward to talking to you again soon. have
sure we will.
Have a good week in Parliament this week. And time for a short break, and then we'll be back with jovial James McCulloch from Brisbane.